The rice paddies stretched endlessly under a sky choked with smoke, and Marcus Dutton learned what it meant to be 19 and terrified in a country that wanted him dead. The year was 1968 November, when the monsoons had finally broken and the ground turned from mud to something worse, a soup of blood and vegetation that sucked at boots and swallowed the unwary. He pressed his face against the dike, M16 clutched so tight his knuckles went white beneath the grime, and counted the seconds between mortar rounds. 3. Always 3. The VC were predictable in their efficiency, mechanical in their desire to turn American boys into statistics. Beside him, Vincent O'Brien, called Hammer even then, though Marcus couldn't remember why, bled from a gash across his thigh where shrapnel had found the gap between his flak jacket and belt. The Marine was making sounds that weren't quite words, high-pitched and animal, and Marcus knew he had maybe 10 minutes before shock took him completely. The rest of their squad was pinned down 40 yards back, trapped behind a burned-out hooch that wouldn't hold against sustained fire. The radio operator was dead, throat opened by something small and fast, and their lieutenant had lost most of his face to the same burst that caught him. Marcus made his decision in the space between heartbeats. He grabbed Hammer's drag handle, the loop of webbing every soldier wore on their back for exactly this purpose, and started pulling. The dike offered maybe 18 inches of cover, not enough when the bullets came searching, and he had to half crawl, half swim through water that came up to his elbows. Hammer screamed when his wounded legs scraped against submerged bamboo. Marcus kept pulling. A round cracked past his ear, so close he felt the displacement of air, hot and wrong. Another stitched through the water, 6 inches from his hand, and he wondered with distant clarity if he'd feel it when the bullet found his spine, or if everything would just go dark and quiet. But his hands kept moving, mechanical now, divorced from the thinking part of his brain that knew this was suicide. The Marine code was simple even if you weren't a Marine. You don't leave your brothers behind. Not in rice paddies. Not in this green hell. Not ever. He reached the hooch somehow, pulled Hammer into the minimal shelter of its collapsed wall, and only then realized he'd been hit. Nothing major, a graze across his left hip that burned like someone had pressed a hot iron there, but enough to make him understand how close he'd come to not making it. Hammer was conscious still, eyes wild, gripping Marcus's arm with fingers that felt like steel cables. The words came out broken. "You stupid army bastard." Marcus grinned despite everything, despite the mortars and the screaming and the knowledge that they probably wouldn't see tomorrow. Jarhead needs a babysitter. The rest of the squad reached them 5 minutes later, and they made it to the extraction point just before nightfall. Hammer lived. Marcus got a piece of metal in his right leg that never quite came out, and a limp that would follow him for the next 50 years. But he learned something in that rice paddy that stuck deeper than shrapnel. Honor wasn't about dying for your country. It was about making sure your brothers didn't. The nightmare released him at 4:47 a.m., same as always, and Marcus woke to find his hands clutching the sheets hard enough to hurt. Sweat soaked through his undershirt despite the October chill that seeped through the walls of his apartment above the clubhouse. His hip ached. The old wound never forgot the weather. And for a moment he was 19 again. Terrified again, certain he was about to die in a land that had no business knowing his name. But he was 68, and the war had ended 46 years ago, and the only thing trying to kill him now was time itself. He sat up slowly, old bones protesting, and reached for the pill bottles on his nightstand. Ibuprofen for the pain. Blood pressure medication because apparently surviving Vietnam meant his heart still wanted to quit on him. A statin for cholesterol. The small humiliations of age, lined up in orange plastic like soldiers awaiting orders. He swallowed them dry, a habit from the war when water was scarce and precious, and stood. The photo frame caught the dim light from the street below. Tyler Marcus Dutton, his son, smiling in his army dress uniform on the day he graduated from basic training. 19 years old, same age Marcus had been in that rice paddy, same stupid certainty that he was invincible. The photo was 17 years old now, taken 2 months before Tyler deployed to Iraq with the 1st Infantry Division. He'd lasted 6 months before an IED turned his Humvee into shrapnel and flame outside Fallujah. Marcus touched the frame with fingers that still trembled slightly from the nightmare. Some mornings he could look at Tyler's face without feeling like someone had reached into his chest and squeezed. This wasn't one of those mornings. He dressed in the dark because he knew where everything was and didn't need light to find his jeans or his Hell's Angels vest or the boots that had walked him through 50 years of hard living. The vest was old leather, worn soft in places, decorated with patches that told a story if you knew how to read them. President patch across the back. Riverside chapter, rocker below it. Service patches on the front. Vietnam veteran, 1st Cavalry Division, POW MIA, and a small purple one in the corner that he never talked about but never removed. Tyler had given him that one. A joke gift on his 16th birthday, world's okayest dad in fading thread. The clubhouse waited below him, familiar as breathing. He descended the stairs from his apartment carefully because the hip was particularly bad this morning, and he refused to install a handrail like Rebecca kept suggesting. The main room smelled of motor oil and old leather and spilled beer from the night before, scents that had soaked into the walls over decades until they became the walls themselves. Friday morning light filtered through windows that needed cleaning, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stillness. The building had been a warehouse once, back in the 1920s when Riverside actually manufactured things and men worked with their hands and took pride in it. Now it was the heart of the local Hells Angels chapter, purchased with pooled money 30 years ago when Marcus was fresh back from the war and angry at everything. The walls were exposed brick, the floor scarred concrete, the furniture an eclectic mix of cast-offs and garage sale finds. Pictures covered every available surface. Brothers who'd ridden with them, charity events, poker runs, memorial photos of those who'd gone on ahead. Hammer sat at the bar nursing coffee, his own attempt at starting the day. Vincent O'Brien was 62 now, gray-haired and thick around the middle, but his eyes were sharp as they'd been in that rice paddy. The scar on his leg was hidden under jeans, but Marcus knew it was there. They'd compared scars enough times over enough years. Usually when they were drunk and feeling philosophical about the bodies that had carried them through decades they had no business surviving. The greeting came without preamble. "You look like shit." Marcus poured himself coffee from the ancient pot that had been making terrible coffee since 1987 and would probably outlive them both. "Feel like shit. Hips acting up. Storm coming. I can feel it in my leg." "That's age, not weather." Same difference. They drank in comfortable silence because they'd had this conversation 10,000 times and the ritual mattered more than the words. Outside, Riverside was waking up slowly, a small town that had seen better days, its downtown half empty since the factory closures of the 90s, its young people fleeing to cities where jobs still existed. But it was home, and Marcus had learned in Vietnam that home mattered more than prosperity. Tommy Chen came in through the side door, arms loaded with cleaning supplies, startling them both despite his best efforts to be quiet. The kid, and he was a kid even at 25, had that careful walk veterans developed, that hyper-awareness of surroundings that never quite left you. Iraq War, Marines, 2 tours before he'd seen enough and come home to Riverside looking for something that made sense. He'd found the clubhouse 6 months ago, and Marcus had recognized the look in his eyes, the same one he'd seen in his own mirror for years after coming back. Tommy set down the supplies with deliberate care. "Morning, figured I'd get started on the bikes for tomorrow's show." Marcus nodded. The charity motorcycle show was their biggest event of the year, drawing riders from 3 states and raising serious money for the Riverside Veterans Hospital. $50,000 last year, and they were hoping for more this time. It was good work, important work, the kind of thing that let old warriors feel like they still served a purpose. Rebecca arrived at 7, punctual as always, carrying her laptop bag and wearing the kind of business casual that looked out of place in the clubhouse but fit her perfectly. She was 65, gray-haired and elegant, despite the leather jacket draped over her shoulders, and Marcus felt the familiar, complicated knot of emotions he'd been feeling for the last 15 years since their divorce. Love, regret, respect, grief, all tangled together until he couldn't separate one from the other. Her voice carried the efficiency of someone who had 1,000 things to do and limited time to do them. "Morning, I've got the charity accounts to reconcile before tomorrow." "Coffee's fresh." That's not what I'd call it, but thank you. She disappeared into the back office, the small room they'd converted into a headquarters for the chapter's financial operations. Rebecca handled all their legitimate business, and it was all legitimate now, had been for 20 years since they'd cleaned house and kicked out anyone still running drugs or guns or anything else that would bring the law down on them. The Hells Angels had a reputation, sure, but the Riverside chapter was clean. They ran poker events and charity rides. They fixed motorcycles and helped old ladies change tires. They were, Marcus thought with some irony, model citizens who just happened to wear leather and ride Harleys and have a name that made people nervous. Hammer watched Rebecca go with the knowing look of a man who'd witnessed their entire relationship from courtship to marriage to divorce to this strange friendship that neither quite had words for. You should talk to her. We talk every day. About real things, about Tyler, about what comes next. Marcus drained his coffee instead of answering because some conversations required more courage than facing mortars in a rice paddy. Rebecca had left him 3 years after Tyler died, not because she stopped loving him, but because they drowned in grief together and couldn't figure out how to swim back to the surface. The divorce had been quiet, civilized, the kind where lawyers drew up papers and neither party fought because what was the point of fighting when you'd already lost everything that mattered? But she'd stayed involved with the club, kept handling their finances, showed up for events and meetings, and slowly became part of his life again, in a different shape. Sometimes Marcus thought they worked better as friends than they ever had as spouses. Other times he lay awake at 3 a.m. and wondered if he'd given up too easily, if there had been a path through the grief they hadn't found because they'd stopped looking. The phone on the bar rang, ancient and loud, a landline they kept because cell coverage in the clubhouse was spotty and emergencies didn't care about modern technology. Marcus grabbed it on the third ring. The voice on the other end was familiar. Danny Spider Martinez, their informant in the local underworld, a guy who ran a pawn shop and heard things and owed the club a favor from way back. He sounded nervous, words tumbling out fast. "Reaper, we got a situation. Need you to listen careful." Marcus straightened, old instincts flaring. "I'm listening." "Serpent MC is planning something." Kane himself, not just his street crew. "Word is he wants to make a move on your operation." Caldwell Kane. The name landed in Marcus's gut like bad news always did, cold and certain. The Serpent MC had been a problem for years, a rival club out of Miller's Crossing, 30 miles east, run by a man whose moral compass had never pointed anywhere near true north. They dealt drugs, trafficked in misery, preyed on the weak, everything the Hells Angels had spent decades fighting against. Kane personally was worse. Smart, ruthless, utterly without conscience. Marcus kept his voice level. "What kind of move?" "Don't know specifics, but I heard charity money and Friday night. That's tonight, man. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." "You sure about this?" "Sure as I can be without putting my neck further out." "Look, I'm telling you because you guys are good people. Kane ain't. Whatever he's got planned, it ain't gonna be friendly." Marcus thanked him, hung up, and found Hammer watching with the same combat-ready focus that had kept them both alive 5 decades ago. No need to explain. Hammer had heard enough to understand. The assessment came quick. Kane wants the charity money, probably figures 50 grand in cash is worth the risk. Rebecca counts it tonight, gets it ready for deposit Monday. She's alone in that office every Friday evening while we're all up front. So he knows our patterns, knows when she's vulnerable. Been watching us. They stared at each other across the bar, 2 old men suddenly feeling very old, remembering when their bodies were young and fast and capable of handling threats without prescription medications and early bedtimes. But they were also remembering something else, that honor and courage didn't depend on youth, that warriors were made by choices more than reflexes. Hammer spoke the truth they both knew. "We're too old for this shit, Mark." Marcus felt the weight of his 68 years, the ache in his hip, the medication bottles upstairs, the way stairs had become challenges instead of afterthoughts. But he also felt something else, something that had never aged or dimmed, the absolute certainty that he would protect his people, no matter what it cost him. The words came out hard and final. "Then we'd better be smart about it. Call Tommy, get him and 4 others for security detail tonight. Nobody gets near that office without going through us. You think Kane's stupid enough to try something with us here? I think Kane's arrogant enough to think we won't see him coming. Hammer pulled out his phone, already dialing, and Marcus stood slowly because his hip needed a moment to remember how joints were supposed to work. He walked to the office door, knocked twice. Rebecca looked up from her laptop, reading glasses perched on her nose, surrounded by spreadsheets that tracked every dollar the chapter earned and spent. She'd always been good with numbers, had worked as an accountant before Tyler was born, and kept those skills sharp even through the years of being a full-time mom and club wife. Now those skills kept them legitimate, kept the IRS happy, kept everything running smooth. Her expression shifted when she saw his face. What's wrong? Got a tip. Serpent MC might be planning something. Tonight probably aimed at you and the charity money. She didn't panic. Rebecca never panicked, but her eyes sharpened with focus. What do you need me to do? Keep your routine normal. Don't let anyone know we're expecting trouble. But stay aware, we'll have security posted and I'll be close. Kane's behind this? Who else? Rebecca leaned back in her chair, processing. She'd been around the club long enough to understand the undercurrents, the politics, the way rival clubs circled each other like sharks testing for weakness. The Serpent MC had been pushing boundaries for years, small provocations that never quite crossed the line into open war. But this, targeting their charity operation, this was different. This was a declaration. Her voice carried steel underneath the calm. He's making a mistake. Coming after our money is one thing. Coming after our charity work? The community won't forgive that. Neither will the other chapters. That's why we're going to be ready. And when he makes his move, we'll make sure everyone knows exactly who started it. She nodded, already turning back to her laptop, already compartmentalizing the threat because work still needed doing, and fear was a luxury neither of them could afford. Marcus watched her for a moment longer, remembering the woman he'd married 35 years ago, fierce and capable and utterly unbreakable even when the world tried its hardest to break her. Tyler's death had bent them both, twisted them in ways that made living together impossible, but it hadn't broken her core. Maybe that's why he'd never stopped loving her, even when love wasn't enough to bridge the gap grief had carved between them. He left her to her work and returned to the main room where Hammer was finishing his calls. Tommy had appeared from wherever he'd been cleaning bikes, and his expression said he'd caught enough of the conversation to understand the stakes. The kid's voice was steady. What do you need? Marcus appreciated that. No questions about danger, no hesitation, just immediate readiness to step into the line of fire. Iraq had taught Tommy the same lessons Vietnam had taught Marcus. That talk was cheap and action was everything. That you protected your brothers without counting the cost. The plan came together quickly because they had all been in enough bad situations to know how these things worked. 6 men total, Marcus, Hammer, Tommy, and 3 other members they could trust absolutely. Posted around the clubhouse starting at 7 p.m. when the Friday night gathering usually began. Eyes on all entrances, weapons close, not visible, nothing that would spook the law if they happened to drive by, but accessible. A deterrent more than anything, though Marcus knew that if Kane was desperate or stupid enough to try something, deterrence might not be enough. The day passed slowly, tension building like the storm Hammer had predicted. Members started arriving around 6, the usual Friday crowd, older men mostly, veterans and riders who'd been with the chapter for decades. They drank beer and told lies and worked on bikes and did all the things that made the clubhouse feel like home. Marcus didn't tell them about the threat because panic helped nobody, but he made sure his security team was positioned and ready. Rebecca stayed in her office, door open, laptop glowing, stacks of cash organized on her desk as she reconciled accounts. $53,427, the result of a year's worth of poker runs and charity events and community goodwill. It would go to the Veterans Hospital on Monday, would pay for physical therapy and counseling and all the things that help broken soldiers find their way back to something like normal. Important money, worth protecting. 8 o'clock came, then 9. Marcus nursed a single beer and watched the street through windows that needed cleaning, looking for vehicles that didn't belong, for patterns that felt wrong. His hip ached, his back hurt. He felt every one of his 68 years and wondered not for the first time if maybe he was too old for this, if maybe it was time to step down and let younger men handle the weight of leadership. But then he remembered. Young men didn't have the experience to see trouble coming. Young men made mistakes born of confidence and inexperience. Old men knew better. Old men had scars that taught them where the dangers hid. Hammer materialized at his elbow, voice low. Could be Spider heard wrong. Could be Kane changed his plans. Could be. Or he's waiting for us to relax. That too. They stood together in the comfortable silence of men who'd shared foxholes and bad marriages and decades of friendship, watching the street, waiting for trouble that might never come or might arrive in the next breath. The night deepened. Members started filtering out, heading home to wives or girlfriends or empty apartments. Friday night winding down the way Friday nights always did. By 10:30, only a dozen people remained. Rebecca was still in her office, still working, and Marcus was beginning to think maybe Spider had been wrong or maybe Kane had lost his nerve. That's when he noticed the girl. She was trying very hard not to be seen, pressed into the shadow of the doorway across the street. Small and thin and wrapped in clothes too light for October's chill. Marcus had spent 50 years observing human behavior, reading body language, recognizing when someone was hiding versus when they were just passing through. This girl was hiding. More than that, she was watching the clubhouse with the kind of focused intensity that set off alarms in his head. He nudged Hammer. 3 o'clock, across the street, you see her? Hammer's eyes found her immediately. Been there about 20 minutes, keeps checking something to her right, like she's waiting for someone. Or watching for someone. She's just a kid. Kids can be lookouts. But even as Marcus said it, something felt wrong about that theory. The girl didn't have the posture of someone working a job. She looked scared, yes, but also hungry and cold and desperate in a way that suggested she wasn't part of any organized operation. Street kid, maybe. Runaway. Riverside had its share, though most didn't last long. Either the cold drove them to shelters, or the reality of homelessness sent them back to wherever they'd come from. Marcus was still watching her when the black van appeared. It came from the east, moving too slowly for normal traffic. No lights on despite the darkness. Every instinct Marcus had developed over 50 years of hard living started screaming. The van pulled up across the street, 50 yards from where the girl was hiding, and cut its engine. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. Two men emerged. Both wore dark clothing, faces shadowed by hats pulled low. Both moved with purpose, with coordination that suggested planning rather than impulse. And when the driver adjusted his coat, Marcus caught a glimpse of what he'd been expecting and dreading, the gleam of metal at his waistband. Hammer saw it too. Gun. Marcus was already moving, hand reaching for his own weapon, a Glock 19 he kept behind the bar for situations exactly like this. When he realized where the men were headed, not toward the front door, not toward the main room where a dozen Hells Angels would present an obvious problem. They were approaching the back of the building, circling toward the side window, toward Rebecca's office. The world slowed down the way it always did when violence was imminent, everything crystallizing into perfect clarity. Marcus's mind ran through scenarios with combat-trained efficiency. He could go out the front door, but that would take 15 seconds and they'd see him coming. He could shoot through the window, but that was murder if he was wrong about their intentions. He could shout a warning, but that might spook them into running or might make them shoot faster. But before he could choose, before he could move, the girl across the street did something that changed everything. She ran, not away from the danger, which would have been the smart play, the safe play. She ran toward it, toward the men with guns, towards certain violence, her feet slapping against pavement loud in the quiet night. She was screaming, voice high and desperate and brave beyond anything Marcus had seen outside of war. The words came crystal clear through the window. "Gun! Lady! Get down! Gun!" Everything happened at once. The two men spun toward the girl, startled, hands moving toward weapons. Rebecca, alerted by the screaming, dropped below her desk. Marcus was through the clubhouse door in 3 steps, Glock drawn, Hammer right behind him. Tommy and the others poured out after them, armed and ready, and the shooting started. The first shot came from the man Marcus now recognized. Caldwell Kane himself, tall and mean-eyed, gun rising toward Rebecca's window. The bullet hit brick 3 feet above where Rebecca had been sitting, a crack of sound that echoed off buildings and shattered the night's peace. The second shot followed immediately, then a third. Wild shots from a man whose plan had just gone sideways. Marcus aimed at Kane's center mass, old training taking over, finger tightening on the trigger. But Kane and his partner were already running, sprinting back toward the van, firing blind shots over their shoulders. One round hit a parked car. Another went wild into the sky. Then they were in the van, engine roaring to life, tires screaming as they fled. Marcus lowered his weapon, breathing hard, adrenaline making his hands shake. The whole encounter had lasted maybe 15 seconds. He turned to find the girl still standing in the middle of the street, frozen now, eyes wide with terror. She was maybe 16, Asian features, dark hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a thin jacket that had seen better days. She looked like she might collapse at any moment. Marcus holstered his gun and approached slowly, hands visible, voice gentle despite the adrenaline still flooding his system. Easy. You're okay. You're safe now. The girl's eyes focused on him, and he saw the exact moment the shock began wearing off and the reality set in. She started shaking, violent tremors that suggested hypothermia or trauma or both. But she didn't run. She stood there, the small, brave girl who just saved a stranger's life, and waited for whatever came next. Hammer was already on his phone calling the police because this was a shooting and they had procedures to follow, documentation to file, questions to answer. Tommy checked the bullet holes in the brick, marking them so investigators could see the trajectory. Other members secured the perimeter, looking for witnesses or additional threats. Rebecca emerged from the office, pale but composed, moving to Marcus's side with the kind of partnership that had survived marriage and divorce and everything between. Her voice was steady. That girl saved my life. I know. Who is she? Don't know yet, but we're going to find out. Marcus turned his attention fully to the girl now, taking in details with an investigator's eye. The backpack that looked like it held everything she owned, the dirt under her nails, the hollow look of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days, the way she held herself, shoulders hunched, ready to run, expecting the worst because the worst was what she'd learned to expect. He kept his voice calm and non-threatening. What's your name? The girl's response came out barely above a whisper. Sarah. I'm Marcus. That woman you just saved? That's Rebecca. He paused, uncertain what to call her. Ex-wife felt wrong. Friend felt insufficient. My partner. Sarah's eyes tracked to Rebecca, then back to Marcus. Calculating odds, measuring danger. She was reading them the same way Marcus had learned to read threats in Vietnam, looking for tells, for weaknesses, for escape routes. Smart kid, scared kid. His next question came gently. How long you been on the street, Sarah? The answer came with resignation, like she'd been expecting the question and knew lying wouldn't help. Weak. Running from? She didn't answer, but her eyes flickered with something, fear, shame, trauma, that told Marcus everything he needed to know. Foster care, probably. Abuse, almost certainly. The same story that played out in too many homes where the system placed vulnerable kids with people who shouldn't be trusted with goldfish, let alone children. Hammer returned from his phone call. Police are 5 minutes out. We need to get statements ready. Marcus nodded but kept his focus on Sarah. Something about her was triggering memories. Connections his brain was trying to make but hadn't quite completed. The way she held herself, the determination underneath the fear, the kind of courage that ran toward danger instead of away from it. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Those men, the ones with guns, you see their faces? Not really. The one who shot, he was taller, maybe 6 foot, hat pulled low, but when he raised his gun, his sleeve came up and I saw. She paused, closed her eyes, remembering. A tattoo, snake, coiled around his wrist, really detailed. Marcus and Hammer exchanged looks. Serpent MC. Not just any member, Kane himself, based on the height and build, which meant this wasn't just a robbery attempt. This was personal, premeditated, and backed by one of the most dangerous men in 3 counties. Tommy appeared with a blanket, draping it around Barney's shoulders with the awkward gentleness of someone who wanted to help but wasn't sure how. The girl accepted it without comment, wrapping it tight, still shaking. Rebecca made a decision. Get her inside. She's freezing, and the police will want to interview her away from the street anyway. Marcus started to object. Procedure was to secure witnesses separately, not mix them with potential victims. But Rebecca gave him the look that had won 1,000 arguments during their marriage, and still won most of them now. They led Sarah inside, guided her to a chair near the bar away from windows and danger. Hammer brought her water. She drank it like she hadn't seen liquid in days, gulping it down so fast Marcus worried she'd make herself sick. When she finished, she clutched the empty cup like it was precious, like someone might take it away if she didn't hold tight enough. The silence stretched. Marcus wanted to ask questions: where she came from, why she was watching the clubhouse, what made her risk her life for a stranger. But police sirens were growing louder, and he knew they'd be asking those same questions soon enough. Better to let her catch her breath, let the shock wear off a bit. But Rebecca, never one to leave well enough alone, knelt down so she was eye level with Sarah. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen. You didn't know me. You owed me nothing. Why did you do it? Sarah looked at her for a long moment, then at Marcus, then down at her empty cup. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone much older than 16, someone who'd seen too much and survived too much and knew exactly how fragile life could be. The words came out simple and devastating. Because no one was there for my mom when she needed help, and I couldn't just watch someone else die. The admission hung in the air, heavy with implications, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just a brave kid. This was a broken kid who'd turned her trauma into action, who'd chosen courage over safety because she knew what it felt like to be helpless. He recognized that impulse. He'd felt it in rice paddies when pulling Hammer to safety had felt less like heroism and more like desperate refusal to accept another death. Before anyone could respond, the police arrived. 2 patrol cars, lights flashing, officers Davidson and Ramirez, whom Marcus knew from community meetings and charity events. Good cops, by and large, the kind who understood that Riverside's Hells Angels were more community organization than criminal enterprise these days. But good cops still had jobs to do and procedures to follow, and a shooting was serious business regardless of who was involved. Officer Davidson took in the scene with experienced eyes: bullet holes in the brick, shell casings on the ground, a dozen armed bikers, and 1 terrified teenager. His voice carried authority without aggression. Anyone hurt? Marcus answered. No injuries. 2 suspects fled in a black van heading east on 5th Street, armed and dangerous. One of them I can identify as Caldwell Kane from Serpent MC. Davidson's expression darkened. Kane's name carried weight in law enforcement circles. Multiple arrests, few convictions, a man who knew how to work the system and slip through its cracks. You're certain? Certain enough. And this young lady can confirm she saw them up close, saw the snake tattoo on the shooter's wrist. All eyes turned to Sarah, who shrank under the attention but nodded confirmation. Ramirez pulled out a notebook, already taking down preliminary statements. The questions came methodical and thorough. What time did she notice the van? How many men? What did they look like? Where was she standing? Why was she watching the clubhouse? That last question made Sarah hesitate, and Marcus saw her calculating whether to lie or tell the truth. The truth won. I was hungry, was going to check the dumpster after you all left. Been watching the place for a few days, learning the schedule. No shame in her voice, just fact. She'd been surviving the only way she knew how, and if that meant scavenging for food, then that's what you did. Davidson's expression softened. He had kids of his own, Marcus knew. Teenagers who'd never know what it felt like to be that desperate. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, details extracted and documented, evidence photographed and collected. More officers arrived to expand the search, to canvass for witnesses, to turn a quiet Friday night into a crime scene. Through it all, Sarah sat in her chair with the blanket wrapped around her, answering questions with increasing exhaustion, looking smaller and more vulnerable as the adrenaline wore off completely. Finally, Davidson closed his notebook. We'll need to contact social services. A minor living on the street. Rebecca cut him off. She stays here tonight. Guest room above the clubhouse. We'll make sure she's safe and fed, and social services can contact her here in the morning. Ma'am, there are protocols. Officer, she just saved my life. That man was about to shoot me through that window, and she warned me. The least I can do is offer her a warm bed and a decent meal. Davidson looked at Marcus, who nodded confirmation. The officer sighed, recognizing a losing battle. Fine, but she doesn't leave the property without police or social services notification, and I need to know her full name for the report. Sarah's answer came quiet. Sarah Mitchell. Something in Marcus's head clicked. Mitchell, that name meant something. Scratching at the edges of memory, he pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos, found the one he was looking for. It was old, 18 years old, taken in Iraq before everything went wrong. Tyler and his unit, smiling for the camera despite the heat and danger. Young men who thought they were invincible. Third from the left, Corporal Daniel Mitchell, Marines, 1st Battalion, 6th Marines. Dark hair, Asian features, that same determined expression Marcus now saw reflected in Sarah's face. His voice came out careful, almost afraid of the answer. Sarah, you ever have a brother? Military, maybe. She looked up sharply, eyes wide. Daniel Mitchell, he was a Marine. Died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. How do you? Marcus turned his phone around, showed her the picture. Because he served with my son, Tyler Dutton. They were in the same unit when an IED hit their convoy outside Kabul. Danny tried to pull Tyler out of the burning Humvee. Your brother saved 3 men that day. He was a hero. The information seemed to drain what little energy Sarah had left. She stared at the photo, tears starting to leak from eyes that had probably cried themselves dry months or years ago. Her hand reached out to touch the screen, fingers hovering over her brother's face like she could reach through time and glass and bring him back. Rebecca moved to sit beside her, arm around her shoulders, providing comfort with presence more than words. Hammer looked away, blinking hard because even old Marines got emotional when talking about fallen brothers. Tommy stood frozen, probably remembering his own friends who hadn't made it back from Iraq. The faces that haunted his own nightmares. Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years, a connection, a purpose beyond simple survival. This girl had saved Rebecca. Her brother had saved Tyler, or tried to, had died in the attempt. There was symmetry there, a debt that maybe couldn't be repaid but could at least be acknowledged. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was broken. After Danny died, I had no one. Our parents were already in a car accident when I was 13. Danny raised me until he enlisted, then foster care. 4 homes in 3 years. The last one, she trailed off, but they all understood what she wasn't saying. Davidson finished his notes, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional weight now hanging over the scene. We'll be in touch. Crime scene techs will be here shortly to process everything. Try not to contaminate the evidence. After the police left, the clubhouse felt too quiet despite the dozen people still present. Members who'd witnessed the shooting stood in small groups, processing what had happened, understanding that tonight had been close. Kane hadn't just threatened them. He'd tried to kill Rebecca, had fired shots that could have ended her life. This was an escalation that couldn't be ignored or negotiated away. Marcus made decisions. Hammer, call everyone. Every chapter within 200 miles. Tell them what happened. Tell them Serpent MC just tried to assassinate our treasurer over charity money. We ride tomorrow night. How many you want? Everyone who can make it. I want Kane to see exactly who he's fucking with. Hammer nodded and stepped away, already dialing. Tommy moved closer. Voice low. What about the kid? Sarah? She stays here. Rebecca's right. We owe her. Social services will want to place her. Let them try. Rebecca was still sitting with Sarah, talking quietly, and Marcus approached to find the girl looking marginally more present, the shock giving way to exhaustion. His voice came gentle. You can't go back to the street. Not now, not after this. Kane saw you. He'll know you're the one who warned us. Sarah's eyes went wide. You think he'll come after me? I think he's the kind of man who eliminates witnesses, which means you need protection. I can take care of myself. Marcus almost smiled at that, at the fierce independence that probably kept her alive this long. But independence couldn't stop bullets. I'm sure you can, but humor me. Stay here tonight, get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out the next steps. Rebecca added, there's a room upstairs, small but clean. It's got a bed and a door that locks from the inside. You'll be safe. Sarah looked between them, clearly torn between pride and pragmatism. Pragmatism won, probably because she was too exhausted to fight. Just tonight. Just tonight, Marcus agreed, though he suspected it would be longer than that. This girl had saved Rebecca, had shown courage that defied her circumstances, and had a connection to his son that felt like the universe demanding he pay attention. He wasn't going to let her disappear back into the streets where Kane could find her. Rebecca led Sarah upstairs to the guest room Marcus maintained above the clubhouse, a space usually reserved for brothers passing through town or members too drunk to ride home safely. Tommy retrieved her backpack from where she dropped it on the street, brought it up along with a bottle of water and the leftover pizza from earlier in the evening. Basic hospitality, the kind any decent person would offer. But judging from Sarah's expression, it was more kindness than she'd experienced in a long time. Downstairs, the clubhouse emptied slowly as members headed home with instructions to be ready tomorrow. The story would spread by morning. Serpent MC had attacked their treasurer, a young girl had saved her life, and Reaper was calling for a gathering. Hell's Angels from Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan would start their engines, would point their bikes toward Riverside, would answer the call, because that's what brothers did. By midnight, only Marcus and Hammer remained. Sitting at the bar nursing beers, neither was really drinking, processing the night's events. Hammer broke the silence. You know what calling everyone means. 500 bikes, minimum. That's a show of force that'll have consequences. Kane already started this. We're just finishing it. That girl, Sarah, you can't adopt every broken kid who crosses your path. I'm not trying to adopt her. I'm trying to keep her alive. Is that what you're telling yourself? Marcus didn't answer because Hammer was right, and they both knew it. The moment he'd seen Sarah's face, the moment he'd connected her to Daniel Mitchell, and through him to Tyler, something had shifted. This wasn't just about protection or duty or repaying a debt. This was about having someone to protect again. About finding purpose in a life that had felt increasingly purposeless since Tyler died. He'd spent 18 years grieving his son, 18 years wondering if he could have done something different, if he could have talked Tyler out of enlisting, or convinced him to take a safer posting, or just been a better father so Tyler had something worth staying home for. All useless speculation, all guilt that served no purpose except to eat him alive in the small hours of the morning. But Sarah was here now, all even in need of exactly the kind of protection Marcus had failed to give his son. Maybe it was the universe offering redemption. Maybe it was just coincidence. Either way, he was going to make sure she didn't end up like Tyler or Daniel. Another name on a memorial wall, another family destroyed by violence and circumstance. His words came out harder than intended. She reminds me of him, Tyler. Same age he was when he came to me and said he'd enlisted. Same look in her eyes, scared but determined, like the world had already hurt her, but she was going to face it anyway. And you couldn't protect Tyler, so you'll protect her. Wouldn't you, if you saw a chance to do it right this time? Hammer considered this, remembering his own losses. A daughter from his first marriage, grown and distant, a son who died at 3 from illness, and nodded slowly. They were old men haunted by the people they'd failed to save. If the universe offered them one more chance to be heroes, even small, domestic heroes, they'd be fools to turn it down. Upstairs, Rebecca checked on Sarah and found her already asleep, still fully clothed, clutching the backpack like someone might steal it while she slept. The pizza sat untouched. Rebecca covered her with an extra blanket, left a note saying breakfast would be at 8, and closed the door quietly. She found Marcus and Hammer at the bar and joined them, accepting the beer Marcus offered without comment. They drank in silence because words felt insufficient for processing what had happened. Kane had tried to kill her. A stranger had saved her. That stranger turned out to be connected to Tyler through her dead brother. And now Marcus was planning something that would either end the conflict or escalate it into open war. Rebecca's voice cut through the silence. What's the plan for tomorrow? Show of force. Ride to Kane's clubhouse with everyone we can muster. Make it clear that attacking us has consequences. You think that'll be enough? I think it's a start. And Sarah? Marcus paused, choosing words carefully. She needs stability, safety, a place where she's not constantly running or hiding or wondering where her next meal comes from. Marcus, we can't just, I know we can't fix her life in one night, but we can give her a safe place to land while she figures things out. After that, it's up to her. Rebecca studied him with the kind of insight that came from 35 years of knowing someone's patterns and tells and weaknesses. She saw through his careful reasoning to the raw need underneath, the desperate desire to save someone that he'd been carrying since Tyler's death. Maybe she saw it because she felt it too, that same hunger to turn grief into something useful, to make sure their son's death meant something. Her decision came firm. Okay, she can stay. But we do this right. Social services, proper paperwork, legal guardianship if it comes to that. No cutting corners. Agreed. They finished their beers in companionable silence, three old friends who'd survived more than most people could imagine. Sitting in a clubhouse that had seen decades of trouble and triumph, planning how to protect a girl they barely knew, because it was the right thing to do, and because sometimes that was reason enough. Marcus was the last to leave, walking through the clubhouse doing a final check. Doors locked, windows secure, lights off except for the security lights that stayed on all night. The building felt different now, like the shooting had changed its character, added another layer to the history soaked into its walls. Tomorrow it would be full of brothers, full of bikes and noise and solidarity. Tonight it was quiet, almost peaceful, with one teenage girl sleeping upstairs and three old warriors scattered to their homes. He climbed the stairs to his apartment slowly, hip complaining about the day's stress, body reminding him that he was 68 and maybe pushing too hard. But his mind was clear, clearer than it had been in months. Purpose did that, gave you something to focus on beyond your own decline, beyond the slow march toward irrelevance and death. Tyler's photo watched him undress and take his evening pills and climb into bed. He stared at his son's face for a long time, memorizing features he already knew by heart, looking for some sign that he was doing the right thing, that protecting Sarah was honoring Tyler's memory rather than trying to replace him. The photo offered no answers, just Tyler's eternal 19-year-old smile, frozen in a moment before Iraq and IEDs and all the ways war found to destroy young men with bright futures. But Marcus thought maybe that was answer enough. Tyler had died trying to save others. That's what the citation for his Bronze Star said, that he'd stayed in the burning Humvee pulling out wounded until the fire consumed him. And Daniel Mitchell had died the same way, trying to drag Tyler to safety, refusing to leave a brother behind. Sarah carried their legacy whether she knew it or not, and Marcus would be damned if he let Kane or anyone else hurt her. Sleep came eventually, dreamless for once, and when the nightmares tried to reach him, they found no purchase. His mind was too full of the present to dwell on the past, too focused on tomorrow to get lost in yesterday. Outside, Riverside slept, unaware that by this time tomorrow its streets would be filled with hundreds of motorcycles, and the carefully maintained peace between rival clubs would be shattered beyond repair. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Marcus slept the sleep of men who'd made hard decisions and accepted their consequences, who knew that sometimes honor demanded you put yourself in harm's way for people who couldn't protect themselves. He'd done it in Vietnam. He'd do it again tomorrow. And somewhere in the room above him, Sarah Mitchell slept too, probably dreaming of her brother or her parents or the family she'd lost and the uncertain future that waited. But for tonight, she was warm and fed and safe, protected by walls and locks and old men who remembered what it meant to stand between the innocent and those who'd do them harm. Dawn would come soon enough, bringing with it all the complications and dangers and challenges Marcus had set in motion. But in the small hours before sunrise, the clubhouse stood quiet and solid, a fortress built from loyalty and brotherhood, and the stubborn refusal of old warriors to accept that their fighting days were done. The storm was coming. Kane had ensured that with his bullets and his arrogance. But when it arrived, it would find not victims, but veterans, not targets, but a brotherhood forged in war and tempered by decades of survival. And at the center of it all, one scared teenage girl who'd thrown a bottle and screamed a warning and changed the trajectory of everything that followed. Heroes came in unexpected packages. Marcus had learned that in rice paddies and firefights in all the years since. Sarah Mitchell was a hero whether she felt like one or not. And Marcus would make damn sure she lived long enough to understand what that meant. Sarah woke to sunlight stabbing through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee strong enough to raise the dead. For 3 disorienting seconds, she couldn't remember where she was. Not under the bridge, not in a foster home, somewhere else. And then the previous night crashed back with the force of bullets hitting brick. The gun, the screaming, Marcus and Rebecca, the photo of her brother standing next to a boy who died trying to save him. She sat up too fast and her head spun. The room was small but clean, exactly as promised, with a bed that had actual sheets and a door that locked and a window that looked down on motorcycles lined up like sleeping metal beasts. Her backpack sat where she'd left it, untouched, which meant something, but she wasn't sure what yet. Voices drifted up from below, male voices, lots of them, and the rumble of engines that made the floorboards vibrate. Sarah moved to the window and stopped breathing. The street was full of motorcycles. Not 10 or 20, but hundreds, stretching in both directions as far as she could see, more arriving even as she watched. Men in leather vests stood in groups, talking, laughing, drinking coffee from paper cups. But there was nothing casual about the gathering. This was something organized, purposeful, dangerous. She dressed quickly in the same clothes from yesterday because they were all she had, finger-combed her hair, and tried to look like someone who belonged anywhere. The hallway outside her room was empty, but the stairs led down to chaos. 50 men at least, maybe more, filling the clubhouse main room, spilling out into the parking lot. Asian faces, black faces, Latino faces, white faces, all united by leather and patches and something Sarah didn't have words for but recognized instinctively: brotherhood. Marcus stood at the bar talking to Hammer, and when he saw Sarah, he waved her over with the kind of casual authority that suggested he was used to people doing what he said. Up close in daylight, he looked older than she'd realized. Deep lines around his eyes, gray threading through what was left of his hair, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body hurt but who refused to admit it. His greeting came simple. "You sleep? Some? Hungry?" She was starving, had been starving for days, but admitting it felt like weakness. Her non-answer was apparently answer enough because Marcus gestured to Tommy, who materialized with a plate. Eggs, bacon, toast, more food than she'd seen in a week. She took it with hands that wanted to shake and found a spot against the wall where she could eat and watch and try to understand what was happening. Rebecca emerged from the office wearing the same clothes from last night, which meant she'd probably slept here too, probably hadn't gone home because going home meant leaving the money unguarded and Kane was still out there. She looked tired but composed, moving through the crowd with coffee and quiet words, organizing something Sarah couldn't quite parse. Hammer's voice carried over the noise. "Brothers, listen up. Reaper wants to address everyone before we ride." The room settled into something approximating quiet, though the rumble of engines outside continued like distant thunder. Marcus climbed onto a chair, his hip clearly hating the movement, but his face showing nothing, and surveyed the crowd with eyes that had probably seen things Sarah couldn't imagine. When he spoke, his voice carried, despite not being particularly loud. "Last night, Caldwell Kane tried to kill Rebecca, shot at her through a window, would have succeeded if not for a 16-year-old girl who had the guts to scream a warning." Heads turned towards Sarah, and she wanted to disappear into the wall but couldn't. Marcus continued, "Kane thinks we're old, thinks we're weak, thinks he can take what's ours, our charity money, our community work, our respect, and we'll just roll over." The anger in the room was palpable, barely contained, old men remembering when they weren't old, when challenges got answered with fists, or worse. Marcus raised a hand and they settled again. "So here's what's happening. We ride at noon, all of us. Every chapter that answered the call. We go to Kane's clubhouse, and we show him exactly who he's fucking with. We don't fire first. We don't start violence. But we make it crystal clear that attacking us has consequences. Hammer spoke up. How many we got? Last count, 843 bikes. More still coming. The number landed like a physical thing, and Sarah understood. This wasn't just about protecting Rebecca. This was about respect, about showing that age didn't mean irrelevance, that old warriors were still warriors. The men around her straightened, looked at each other, and she saw decades fall away as they remembered who they used to be. Someone called out, "What about the girl? She's safe here while we're gone." Marcus's answer came firm. "She stays here with security detail. 10 men, fully armed. Kane doesn't get near her." After the meeting broke up, Sarah found herself alone with Rebecca, who'd brought fresh coffee and the kind of assessing look that suggested she saw through whatever front Sarah was trying to maintain. The question came gentle but direct. "You understand what's happening here?" "Not really." "Marcus is going to war over me, over you, over the principle that Kane can't just shoot at people and walk away." Sarah absorbed this, trying to understand why strangers would risk themselves for her, why any of this mattered to men who owed her nothing. Her confusion must have shown because Rebecca sat beside her with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent decades translating male posturing into plain English. "20 years ago, I was you." "Well, similar. Foster care, 5 homes, ran away at 14 and lived on the streets until Hell's Angels found me." The admission hit like cold water. "You were homeless?" "Yes. Scared?" "Absolutely. But Marcus's father was president then, and he believed everyone deserved a second chance. Took me in, got me off the streets, helped me finish high school. That's where I met Marcus. He was fresh back from Vietnam, angry at everything, trying to figure out how to be a person instead of a soldier." Sarah tried to imagine Rebecca young and homeless and couldn't quite manage it. The woman beside her was too composed, too together, too much like someone who'd always belonged somewhere. "I was 17 when we started dating, 19 when we got married, 20 when Tyler was born. Built a whole life with this club, with these men. They're not perfect. Marcus sure as hell isn't. But they're loyal. They take care of their own. But I'm not their own." Rebecca's smile carried sadness and warmth in equal measure. "You saved my life. That makes you family whether you accept it or not." Before Sarah could respond, the clubhouse doors burst open and Tommy ran in, phone in hand, face urgent. "Turn on the news, now." Someone found the remote and the TV mounted above the bar flickered to life. Local news. A perfectly coiffed anchor with the expression people got when reporting tragedy. The headline banner read, "Gang Violence Rocks Riverside." The anchor's voice carried practiced concern. Riverside police are investigating a shooting that occurred late Friday night outside a local motorcycle club. Authorities say Caldwell Kane, president of the Serpent Motorcycle Club, has issued a statement claiming he was acting in self-defense after being threatened by members of the Hells Angels. Kane is calling for calm and asking authorities to investigate what he describes as an attempt to kidnap a minor who is allegedly being held against her will. The screen cut to Kane himself, handsome in an aging rock star way, clean cut for the cameras, wearing a button-down shirt instead of leather, every inch the concerned citizen. His voice dripped false sincerity. "These men have this young girl, and I was simply trying to ensure her safety when they opened fire. I'm calling on social services to intervene before someone gets hurt." Sarah felt the room's temperature drop. Kane had flipped the narrative, made himself the hero and them the villains, and he'd done it on morning television where the whole town could see. Marcus's face had gone carefully blank, which Sarah was learning meant he was furious but controlling it. Hammer killed the TV. "That lying son of a..." "He's smart," Marcus's voice cut through the anger. "Public opinion matters, and he just painted us as kidnappers and him as a concerned citizen." Rebecca stood. "We need to counter this. I can call Channel 7, get our side out there." "No," said Marcus was already moving toward his phone. "We handle this legally. Tommy, call Patricia Huang at Social Services. Tell her we need her here now to verify Sarah's safety involuntary presence. Hammer, get Jake Morrison on the phone. We need a lawyer present when police show up, and they will show up. Sarah's chest tightened. They're going to make me leave. Not if we document everything properly. You're here voluntarily. You're safe. You witnessed a crime. That makes you a material witness under our protection until Kane's arrested. But foster care, one problem at a time. The next 2 hours descended into bureaucratic chaos. Patricia Huang arrived first, mid-50s, Asian American, carrying the exhausted efficiency of a social worker who'd seen too much and saved too few. She interviewed Sarah privately in the office, asking questions about her living situation, her foster homes, why she'd run, whether she felt safe with the Hells Angels. Sarah told the truth because lying had never served her well. The last foster home wasn't safe. The man there, Mr. Miller, he touched me inappropriately. I ran because staying felt worse than being homeless. Patricia's expression flickered with anger and resignation. We're investigating Mr. Miller based on other reports. But Sarah, you understand you can't just live with a motorcycle club? There are procedures, background checks, proper placements. So you're sending me somewhere else? Another home where maybe the next guy is worse? I'm trying to find you somewhere safe. I'm safe here. Patricia looked through the office window at the hundreds of bikers gathering. The weapons Sarah could see even when they tried to hide them. The barely controlled violence simmering under every interaction. Her skepticism showed, this doesn't look safe to me. They protected me from men with guns. What's the system going to do, fill out forms? The social worker didn't have an answer for that, and Sarah realized with cold clarity that she was on her own the way she'd always been on her own. The system would process her, place her, move her through the machine until she aged out or broke, and nobody would actually care whether she survived the experience. Before Patricia could respond, police arrived. Officers Davidson and Ramirez plus 2 detectives Sarah didn't recognize. They interviewed everyone separately, took statements, photographed the bullet holes that hadn't been repaired yet. Jake Morrison, the lawyer Marcus called, was a silver-haired veteran who looked like he ate prosecutors for breakfast. And he positioned himself as a barrier between the club and overzealous law enforcement. The lead detective, Martinez, sharp-eyed and skeptical, pulled Marcus aside for a conversation Sarah could partially hear. Mr. Dutton, we have a complaint that you're holding a minor against her will. From Caldwell Kane, the man who tried to murder my ex-wife? We have to investigate all allegations. Then investigate. You'll find Sarah Mitchell is here voluntarily, under witness protection pending Kane's arrest, and has formally complained about abuse in her foster placement. Patricia Huang can confirm everything. Martinez looked like he wanted to argue, but Jake's presence blocked that avenue. The lawyer's voice carried steel underneath the politeness. My client has cooperated fully. Sarah Mitchell has given a voluntary statement. Unless you're charging someone with a crime, this interview is over. The police left with obvious reluctance, and Sarah understood she had just watched powerful men play chess with her life as the prize. It should have felt violating, but mostly felt inevitable. This was how the world worked. People with authority deciding things for people without it. Patricia returned to the office. Sarah, I'm granting emergency placement here for 72 hours while we investigate Mr. Miller and process your case. But after that, you'll need to go to a licensed facility until we find appropriate foster care. So 3 days. 3 days to figure out next steps. Use them wisely. After the authorities left, the clubhouse felt like a pressure cooker, waiting to explode. The ride to Kane's clubhouse was scheduled for noon, and it was already 11:30, which meant 800 bikers would soon be rolling through Riverside streets in a show of force that would either end the conflict or start a war neither side could control. Marcus found Sarah sitting in the same spot against the wall, watching everything, processing the reality that in 72 hours she'd be back in the system, back to running or surviving or giving up. His presence was solid, reassuring in a way she didn't trust yet but wanted to. You okay? The question was absurd. Nothing was okay and might never be okay again, but she recognized it as the thing people said when they meant something else. I guess. 3 days isn't much time. I've survived on less. Marcus lowered himself carefully to sit beside her, his hip clearly protesting, but his face showing nothing. Your brother Danny, what did he tell you about the Marines, about service? The question caught her sideways. Said it gave him purpose. Said he was protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. That's what he was doing when he died, trying to pull my son out of a burning vehicle. 3 other men made it because Danny wouldn't leave anyone behind. Sarah felt tears threatening and pushed them down because crying in a room full of bikers felt like the worst kind of weakness. Did it matter that he was brave? He still died. It mattered to the men he saved. It mattered to their families, and it matters to me. Marcus pulled something from his pocket, a small patch, leather backing, embroidered with wings and the words, Guardian Angel. This is new. We're creating it for people who save one of ours. You're the first person to earn it. I just screamed. Most people would have run. You ran toward danger. That's the definition of courage. The patch felt heavy in her hands, more substantial than cloth and thread should be. Sarah traced the stitching and tried to understand what accepting it would mean, what obligations came with being seen instead of invisible. Outside, engines roared to life, hundreds of them, a mechanical thunder that shook windows and rattled her bones. Marcus stood with a grunt that tried to be silent. Time to go. You stay here with the security team. Don't open the door for anyone except us. Tommy has my number if there's trouble. Sarah watched him walk away, watched him transform from old man with bad hip to president of a brotherhood. Watched him climb onto a Harley that looked like it weighed more than she did. Rebecca appeared beside him on her own bike. Sarah hadn't known she rode, and then the mass exodus began. 843 motorcycles rolled out of Riverside in formation, 3 and 4 abreast, stretching for blocks, chrome glinting in October sun, leather-clad riders sitting straight and proud despite their age. Citizens stopped to watch, some filming on phones, some just staring at the spectacle of old men going to war. The sound was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrible, the kind of thing Sarah would remember forever whether she wanted to or not. Tommy stood guard at the door, 9 other men positioned at strategic points, all armed, all watching. Sarah retreated to her room upstairs because being surrounded by protective strangers felt suffocating, and from the window she could see the empty street, the silence after the storm, the waiting. An hour passed. 2. Sarah's phone, a cheap prepaid thing she'd managed to keep charged at the library, buzzed with a message from an unknown number. This is Rebecca. We're at Kane's clubhouse. No violence yet, but tension is high. You safe? She typed back, safe, bored, scared. Normal reactions. Stay put. The afternoon crawled. Sarah dozed fitfully, woke to shadows lengthening, checked her phone obsessively for updates that didn't come. Downstairs, the security team played cards and watched the street and radiated the casual alertness of men who'd done this before, who knew how to wait while staying ready. When her phone finally rang at 5 p.m., Rebecca's voice carried exhaustion and relief. It's over. No shots fired. Kane saw how many of us showed up and backed down. We're heading back. Is Marcus okay? He's fine. Sore and tired, but fine. We'll be there in an hour. The bikes returned just after 6, fewer than left. Some had peeled off to head home, but still impressive, still formidable. Marcus dismounted with obvious pain but satisfaction in his eyes, and when he saw Sarah watching from the doorway, his nod said, We handled it. You're safe now. That night, the clubhouse filled with celebration. Beer and stories, laughter and relief, old men reliving their moment of relevance. Sarah stayed on the periphery, accepted food and water and a sweatshirt when the temperature dropped, listened to war stories, both literal and figurative. Nobody pressured her to talk or participate or be anything except present, which felt like the greatest gift anyone had offered in years. Later, when most had gone home and only the core members remained, Marcus sat with her at the bar. You've got 2 more days before social services moves you. We need a plan. What kind of plan? Rebecca and I talked. We want to apply for emergency foster placement. Keep you here legally while things get sorted. Sarah's throat closed. You barely know me. I know enough. You're brave. You're smart. You survived things that would break most people. And you saved Rebecca's life. That's enough. What if I'm too broken to fix? Marcus's laugh was unexpected, rough but genuine. Kid, we're all broken. The trick is finding people who understand your particular damage. Rebecca and I lost our son. You lost your brother. Maybe we can't fix each other, but we can at least understand. She wanted to believe him, but trust felt dangerous. Hope felt like setting herself up for disappointment. Still, the alternative was going back into the system, and that felt worse than risking this fragile offer of family. Her voice came out smaller than intended. Okay. Okay, we try. Okay, we try. Marcus extended his hand and Sarah shook it, formal and binding, a contract sealed in leather and chrome, and the desperate hope that maybe this time things would be different. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of October day that promised winter wasn't far behind. Marcus stood in front of the mirror in his apartment, adjusting a tie he hadn't worn in 3 years, fingers fumbling with the knot because dress clothes felt like costumes now, foreign and constricting. The last time he'd worn a suit was Tyler's memorial service, and the memory made his hands shake until he forced them still through sheer will. Rebecca had picked out the clothes, dress pants, button-down shirt, the tie, leather jacket instead of his vest, because they needed to look respectable for the judge. Sarah waited downstairs wearing a dress Rebecca had bought yesterday, dark blue and modest, the kind of thing that screamed responsible guardian choices to anyone paying attention. The girl looked uncomfortable, kept tugging at the hem, unused to fabric that didn't come from thrift stores or donation bins. The courthouse sat in downtown Riverside, an old limestone building that had witnessed a century of justice and injustice in roughly equal measure. Jake Morrison met them on the steps, briefcase in hand, projecting the kind of confidence lawyers cultivated when they knew the law and weren't afraid to weaponize it. His greeting came brisk. Patricia Huang filed her report this morning. It supports emergency placement with you two, but the judge will want to hear from Sarah directly. They entered through metal detectors, past security guards who nodded at Marcus because everyone in Riverside knew who he was, climbed marble stairs worn smooth by decades of nervous feet. The courtroom was smaller than Sarah had expected from television, wood-paneled, informal, with a judge's bench that looked designed to intimidate. A handful of people already waited. Patricia Huang with her files, a court reporter, and sitting in the back row like a cancer that refused to die. Gerald Miller. Sarah stopped when she saw him, every muscle locking, and Marcus felt rage flood his system so completely he tasted copper. Miller looked exactly like the kind of man who'd abuse foster kids, middle-aged and soft, thinning hair combed over a bald spot, wearing a cheap suit and cheaper cologne, eyes that slid away when you looked directly at them. He had a lawyer beside him, some public defender who looked fresh out of law school and already defeated by life. Jake's voice came low in Marcus's ear. Don't react. We handle this in court, not with fists. Marcus forced his hands to unclench because Jake was right, even though every instinct screamed to cross the room and introduce Miller's face to the nearest hard surface. Instead, he guided Sarah to a seat on their side, Rebecca on her other flank, creating a barrier between the girl and the man who'd driven her to the streets. Judge Martha Brennan entered at 9 sharp, 70 years old if she was a day, white-haired and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for not tolerating bullshit from anyone regardless of how expensive their suit was. Everyone stood, sat when told, and the machinery of justice ground into motion with all the speed of continental drift. The judge reviewed the file Patricia had submitted, reading glasses perched on her nose, taking her time while everyone else tried not to fidget. Finally, she looked up. This is an unusual situation. Emergency foster placement with divorced individuals who run a motorcycle club. Ms. Huang, explain your reasoning. Patricia stood, radiating the exhausted professionalism of someone who'd fought the system so long she'd become part of it. Your Honor, Sarah Mitchell has been in 4 foster placements in 3 years. The most recent resulted in abuse allegations we're investigating. She witnessed a violent crime as a material witness in an ongoing case and has established rapport with Mr. Dutton and Ms. Dutton, who have the resources and willingness to provide stable housing. The Duttons are divorced. Yes, Your Honor, but they maintain a functional co-parenting relationship in both past background checks. Given Sarah's trauma history, continuity of placement outweighs unconventional family structure. Judge Brennan turned her attention to Miller's lawyer. Mr. Foster, your client has concerns? The young lawyer stood, shuffling papers. Your Honor, Mr. Miller disputes the abuse allegations and maintains he provided appropriate discipline within his rights as a licensed foster parent. He's concerned about Sarah's well-being in an environment with known criminal elements. The temperature in the courtroom dropped 10 degrees. Marcus felt Rebecca's hand on his arm, warning and restraint, but he kept his expression neutral because losing his temper would only hurt Sarah. Jake rose with the kind of deliberate calm that preceded devastating legal strikes. Your Honor, if I may address the criminal elements accusation, Marcus Dutton is a decorated Vietnam veteran with no criminal record. Rebecca Dutton is a licensed accountant with no criminal record. The Riverside Hells Angels chapter operates a registered nonprofit that raised $53,000 last year for the Veterans Hospital. Perhaps Mr. Foster is confusing community service with criminality. Before the judge could respond, Jake continued. As for Mr. Miller's appropriate discipline, I have here bank records showing he received $10,000 from Caldwell Kane, president of the Serpent Motorcycle Club, on the same day Kane attempted to murder Rebecca Dutton. Mr. Miller provided information that facilitated that assassination attempt. Hardly the behavior of a concerned guardian. He slid documents across to the judge, copies to the prosecutor who'd been sitting silent until now, but suddenly looked very interested. Miller's face went white, then red, then white again. His lawyer started stammering objections that died under the weight of paper evidence. Judge Brennan studied the bank statements with an expression that suggested she'd seen terrible things in her career, but this ranked among the worst. Mr. Miller, you took money from a criminal organization and provided intelligence that led to attempted murder? Miller's voice came out strangled. I was just... Bailiff, please escort Mr. Miller out. He's excused from this hearing and I'm recommending immediate investigation by the district attorney. Two deputies flanked Miller and walked him out, the man's protests fading as the courtroom doors closed. His lawyer looked like he wanted to follow, but professional obligation kept him seated, though he made no further arguments on his client's behalf. The judge's attention shifted to Sarah. Ms. Mitchell, approach the bench. Sarah stood on legs that shook, walked forward with Rebecca beside her for support, stopped at the designated spot. Up close, Judge Brennan looked less intimidating and more exhausted. A woman who'd spent decades trying to protect children in a system designed to fail them. The question came gentle. Sarah, tell me in your own words why you ran from Mr. Miller's home. Sarah's mouth went dry. She told Patricia, told the police, but saying it in open court with strangers watching felt different, harder, like exposing wounds that hadn't healed and might never heal. But Marcus's voice echoed in her memory. Courage meant doing the right thing even when you were terrified, so she found words. He touched me, at night when his wife was asleep. Said it was checking on me, but his hands went places that weren't checking. I told him to stop, and he said I was ungrateful, that I should be thankful anyone took me in. So I left, climbed out the window, and didn't look back. Her voice stayed steady despite everything, and she saw the judge's eyes soften with something that looked like rage and sorrow mixed together. Judge Brennan had probably heard similar stories 1,000 times, probably knew exactly how many Sarah Mitchells slipped through the cracks because the system had too many cracks and not enough people who cared. Why do you want to stay with Mr. and Mrs. Dutton? Sarah looked back at Marcus and Rebecca sitting together, divorced but united, two people who'd lost their son and somehow found room for her in the space he'd left behind. Because they see me, not as a problem or a paycheck or something to use, as a person. And because I think, her voice caught, I think maybe they need me as much as I need them. The courtroom went silent except for the court reporter's fingers on keys. Judge Brennan removed her glasses, rubbed her eyes, and Sarah recognized the gesture. Someone making a decision that mattered, that would change lives, trying to make sure they got it right. Emergency guardianship granted to Marcus and Rebecca Dutton, joint custody, pending formal adoption proceedings. Sarah will remain in their care while investigations into Mr. Miller continue and while the Duttons complete required foster parent training. The gavel came down once, sharp and final. We're adjourned. The relief hit Sarah so hard she swayed, and Rebecca caught her, arms strong and certain, whispering something Sarah couldn't hear through the roaring in her ears. They'd done it. Marcus and Rebecca had actually done it. She wasn't going back to the system, wasn't being shuffled to another stranger's house to wait for the next violation. Outside the courthouse, Jake shook Marcus's hand. That went better than expected. Miller's finished. Between the abuse allegations and the Kane connection, he'll be lucky to avoid prison time. Marcus's response came flat. Good. Man like that shouldn't be trusted with goldfish. Patricia Huang approached with a tablet full of forms. Congratulations. Though I'm using that word loosely given the circumstances. You'll need to complete foster parent certification within 60 days, and Sarah will have mandatory counseling sessions twice a week. I'll be conducting home visits monthly. Whatever it takes. Mr. Dutton, I'm trusting you with a deeply traumatized young woman who has every reason not to trust anyone. Don't make me regret this. Marcus met her eyes without flinching. I won't. They drove back to Riverside in Marcus's truck, Sarah in the middle, Rebecca by the window, feeling like something fragile that needed protection from both sides. Nobody spoke much because words felt inadequate for processing what had happened. Sarah was theirs now, legally and officially, at least until the adoption went through. They were hers, these two broken strangers who decided she was worth saving. School was next, and Marcus handled it with military efficiency. Enrolled Sarah at Riverside High junior year, classes starting tomorrow. She'd missed 3 weeks already, would need tutoring to catch up, but the principal, a veteran herself, was sympathetic and flexible. Sarah walked halls that smelled like every school everywhere, imagining herself trying to be normal, when normal felt like a language she'd forgotten. That afternoon, Marcus found her in her room staring at textbooks she was supposed to read. You ready for this? School? Normal life? Pretending everything's fine? Do I have a choice? There's always choices. Some just suck less than others. Sarah almost smiled at that, at the brutal honesty that characterized everything Marcus said. He didn't pretend life was fair or easy, or that her trauma would magically disappear because she had a safe place to sleep. But he also didn't treat her like she was made of glass, didn't coddle or hover, just offered straightforward assessment and let her make decisions. I'll try, she said, and meant it. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and routine. School was exactly as miserable as expected. Suspicious kids who knew her story from news coverage, teachers who treated her like a charity case, hallways where she felt constantly watched. But there was also Jessica, a quiet girl with foster care history who sat next to Sarah in English and offered tentative friendship. And Mr. Chen, who taught history and happened to be Tommy's uncle and made sure Sarah wasn't drowning. Home, and the clubhouse was home now. She was accepting that? Meant dinners with Marcus and Rebecca. Awkward attempts at family conversation, slowly learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. Rebecca helped with homework and bought clothes that actually fit. Marcus taught her motorcycle maintenance, his version of therapy, letting her work through problems with wrenches instead of words. Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after the court hearing, Sarah walked out of school to find a commotion in the parking lot. 20 motorcycles surrounded the building, Serpent MC patches visible, and in the center stood a man she didn't recognize but whose posture screamed violence, looking for an excuse. Students were recording on phones, some backing away, some moving closer because teenagers were idiots about danger. Sarah's first instinct was to run, but her legs carried her forward instead. Some stupid part of her brain needing to know what was happening. The man spotted her and smiled, ugly and predatory. Sarah Mitchell, been looking for you. Tommy appeared from nowhere, positioning himself between Sarah and the threat. Walk away, Razor, this doesn't concern you. Kane wants a message sent. Girl cost him everything. His operations burned, his crews scattered, and he's looking at 25 to life. Someone's got to pay. More motorcycles arrived, but these had Hell's Angels patches, and Marcus was in the lead with murder in his eyes. He dismounted fast for a man with a bad hip, gun visible under his jacket. flanked by Hammer and 20 brothers who looked ready to turn the school parking lot into a battlefield. Marcus's voice carried cold authority. Razor, you've got exactly 10 seconds to get back on your bike and leave before this ends bad for everyone. You really want to do this in front of witnesses? In front of kids? I really want to protect that girl. Everything else is negotiable. Sarah watched the two groups face off, young thugs versus old warriors, arrogance versus experience, and knew with sick certainty that people were about to die unless something changed. Police sirens grew louder in the distance, but wouldn't arrive in time to matter. Then Hammer did something unexpected. He lowered his weapon, raised his hands, and walked into the space between. Razor, I'm Marine Corps. Served 2 tours in Vietnam, lost friends, nearly died myself. You know what that taught me? That dying's easy. Living with consequences is hard. Kane made choices, and now he pays. But you? You don't have to make the same mistake. Walk away. Live to ride another day. The moment hung suspended, violence coiled and ready, but not yet released. Razor's hand was on his knife, his crew behind him, tense with anticipation. But something in Hammer's words or posture, or maybe just the weight of inevitability, made him hesitate. Police cars screamed into the parking lot, multiple units, Sheriff Cooper himself leading them. Everyone freeze! Hands visible! Now! The Serpent MC crew scattered, engines roaring, disappearing in multiple directions faster than police could coordinate pursuit. Razor went with them, spitting a final threat. This ain't over, old man. Marcus's response followed him. It is, you just don't know it yet. Sheriff Cooper approached with the expression of a man who'd had enough. Marcus, I respect what you're trying to do, but you can't bring 20 armed men to a high school every time there's a threat. This has to stop. Then arrest Kane's crew. Lock them up. Give me something besides my own people protecting what's mine. We're working on it, but these things take time. Sarah doesn't have time. That man's just threatened her life in front of 50 witnesses. The sheriff had no good answer for that, and they all knew it. The justice system ground slow while predators moved fast. And in the gap between, people got hurt. Marcus had learned that lesson in Vietnam, and it applied just as much on American streets. That night, Marcus sat with Sarah on the clubhouse steps watching stars appear. You understand what happened today. Razor won't quit. Kane won't quit. This is going to keep happening until law enforcement solves it, or we do. I should leave. Go somewhere Kane can't find me. Absolutely not. But people could get hurt. People already got hurt. Rebecca nearly died. You've been traumatized. Kane's victims are scattered across 3 counties. This isn't about you causing problems. It's about standing up to predators who think they can take whatever they want. Sarah absorbed this, trying to reconcile her instinct to disappear with Marcus's insistence that running solved nothing. She'd spent 3 years running, and it had never made her safer, just more alone. His voice softened. When Tyler enlisted, I tried to talk him out of it. Told him he was too young, that war would destroy him, that I'd already seen enough violence for our whole family. You know what he said? What? That some things were worth fighting for even if fighting hurt. That protecting people who couldn't protect themselves mattered more than staying safe. Marcus paused. He was right, and he died proving it. So yeah, standing up to Kane is dangerous. But the alternative, letting him win, that's worse than danger. That's betraying everything my son believed in. They sat in silence after that, 2 people bound by loss and circumstance, watching Riverside settle into night. Tomorrow would bring more challenges and threats and the grinding reality of making this impossible situation work. But tonight they had stars and quiet and the fragile promise that maybe family could be chosen instead of inherited. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the clubhouse main room, surrounded by 300 Hell's Angels, while Marcus addressed the crowd. Brothers, sisters, we gather to make official what's already true. Sarah Mitchell saved Rebecca's life. She stood up to Kane's crew. She's proven herself family not by blood, but by choice and courage. He held up a leather vest, custom fitted, with the guardian angel patch prominent above the heart. Sarah's hands shook as he helped her into it, leather settling on her shoulders like armor and acceptance combined. Rebecca appeared with adoption papers, signed and notarized. making it legal and permanent. Sarah Dutton, our daughter. The room erupted in cheers and engine revs, and Sarah felt tears finally break through. Not from sadness, but from belonging, from being seen and chosen and protected. Marcus hugged her awkwardly because physical affection didn't come natural to either of them, but his grip was strong and certain and said everything words couldn't. That spring, Sarah graduated with decent grades and a college acceptance letter, scholarship money covering tuition. She'd chosen pre-med, following in her brother's footsteps of service, wanting to save lives the way Danny and Tyler had tried to. Marcus watched her walk across the stage to receive her diploma and remembered Tyler's graduation. The pride and fear mixed together, knowing his son was grown and unstoppable. They rode together now, Sarah on her own bike that Marcus had rebuilt for her 17th birthday, comfortable with mechanics and leather, and the brotherhood that had adopted her as thoroughly as her parents had. Through it all, Kane sat in federal prison awaiting trial on trafficking and attempted murder charges. His empire collapsed, his crew scattered. Razor had been arrested 3 weeks after the school confrontation for unrelated warrants and took a plea deal rather than face Marcus's testimony. Justice was slow but inevitable. On a Saturday in June, Sarah and Marcus rode to Riverside Veterans Memorial, parking their bikes beside fresh flowers someone had left. Tyler's name was carved in black granite along with 200 others who died in foreign wars fighting for something they believed mattered. Daniel Mitchell's name was there too, 2 rows down, and Sarah traced the letters with fingers that no longer shook when she remembered. Marcus stood beside his. "You've made them proud, both of them." "I hope so." "I know so. Taking broken pieces and building something new, that's the bravest thing anyone can do." They rode back to the clubhouse where Rebecca was setting up for Sunday dinner, a tradition that now included Sarah's girlfriend Jessica and Tommy's family, and the ever-expanding circle of people who'd somehow become theirs. The parking lot was full of bikes, and the grill was smoking, and someone had music playing too loud, but nobody complained because this was home. Sarah helped Rebecca with side dishes, comfortable in the kitchen now, part of the rhythm rather than guest or burden. Marcus supervised the grill with Hammer beside him. 2 old men who'd survived war and loss and decades of hard living, still standing, still serving, still protecting what mattered. That evening, as the sun set and the party wound down, Marcus found Sarah sitting on the clubhouse steps staring at nothing. Thinking about something? Everything. How different life is now compared to a year ago. How I almost didn't make it. But you did. That counts for something. Sarah looked at this man who'd chosen her when he had every reason not to, who'd fought for her and taught her and loved her in his gruff, uncomfortable way. "Thank you for seeing me, for not giving up." Marcus's response came simple. That's what fathers do. They sat together watching stars emerge, motorcycle engines cooling in the parking lot, family and friends cleaning up inside. The clubhouse lights glowed warm and welcoming, no longer a place where Sarah watched from shadows, but somewhere she belonged completely. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at unexpected touches, still carried trauma that therapy helped but couldn't erase. But she also had Marcus and Rebecca, and a community that had claimed her as one of their own. The guardian angel patch on her vest wasn't just decoration. It was identity, purpose, proof that she'd taken the worst thing that ever happened and transformed it into saving someone's life. Kane had tried to destroy them and instead given them each other. Tyler and Daniel had died as heroes and left behind a legacy that continued in Sarah's determination to save lives. The system had failed her, but people hadn't, and that made all the difference between surviving and living. Marcus stood, hip protesting as always, extending a hand to help her up. "Come on, Rebecca made pie and Hammer will eat it all if we don't hurry." Sarah took his hand and let herself be pulled to her feet, following him inside to warmth and laughter and the imperfect, beautiful mess of family, chosen and fought for and earned through courage neither had known they possessed until tested. The door closed behind them. The stars kept shining. And somewhere in federal lockup, Caldwell Kane rotted, forgotten by everyone except the victims whose lives he'd tried to destroy, but who'd survived anyway, stronger for having faced him and won.